This story is about a love quadrangle, manipulation, and murder. Someone from this group will die, and experts will call it a crime. On May 13, 2005, investigators visited a house on the outskirts of Olympia, Washington, in search of a woman named Mechele Linehan. She was a successful individual with a master's degree in public administration and worked for the Washington State Ethics Board. In addition, Mechele was involved in charity work. At first glance, her personal life seemed perfect, a loving doctor husband and a beautiful daughter. But why were investigators from faraway Alaska interested in her? As it turned out, the reason was a decade-old murder that took place in the city of Anchorage. And as it became clear, Mechele Linehan had quite an interesting past, which we will now learn about. Mechele Linehan, named Mechele Hughes, was born in New Orleans. She was a bright and ambitious girl with big dreams. At the tender age of 16, Mechele decided to leave her hometown and go to New York City, aiming to build a career as a model. In the big city, she found a job, but her earnings did not meet her expectations. That's when Mechele realized that she needed to radically change her life, find a new job and marry a wealthy man. But first, it was necessary to get a higher education. To save money for tuition and find a potential husband, in 1994, Mechele moved to Anchorage, Alaska, and got a job as a dancer in a club. Why did Mechele choose Anchorage to earn money and find a husband? The fact is that in the 1990s, commercial fishing was thriving in Alaska and new oil fields were opening up. The city attracted businessmen, fishermen, and oil industry workers who had a lot of money and could afford to spend it on a charming young girl. At that time, Mechele was only 21. As we can see, Mechele was a determined and goal-oriented person, ready to take risks to achieve her goals. But will this approach to life pay off? Mechele wasn't the best dancer at the club, but she managed to earn a decent starting capital in a few months. She received from $1,000 to $3,000 per night, which made her the most in-demand girl in the establishment. But what exactly did Mechele do? You might think of something indecent, but no. She simply sat with clients in revealing outfits and had conversations with them. In my opinion, this approach to work looks rather dubious, but who am I to judge? In October 1994, a new client appeared at the club Leppink. He came to Alaska with the intention of engaging in commercial fishing. After meeting Mechele, Kent became her regular visitor. They spent hours in private conversations. Before leaving for Anchorage, Kent's parents gave him a considerable sum of money, which he spent on the charming Mechele without hesitation. Their relationship developed rapidly, and just a month after they met, Kent proposed to the girl. Interestingly, he did not tell his parents about Mechele's real profession. And here's what Kent's mother, Betsy, said about his chosen one.
She didn't love him the way he loved her. I have a suspicion that there were other men in Mechele's life.
Well, a mother's heart is rarely wrong. Kent moved into Mechele's house, and everything seemed to be wonderful. However, the girl did not quit her job at the club. In December 1994, a traveling salesman, Scott Hilk, visited there. He immediately noticed the attractive young dancer. Things went so far that Scott also settled in Mechele's house and later proposed to her. Now there were 3 of them living under one roof: Kent, Mechele, and Scott. A strange situation, isn't it? You probably have many questions. How did the men feel about such cohabitation? It's very simple. Mechele told Kent that Scott preferred men and hinted to Scott that Kent was gay. Thus, they were not concerned about rivalry. Mechele continued to dance at the club as it brought in a lot of money, and she was not going to give up such an income, and the grooms, it seems, did not mind. In the summer of 1995, a widower named John Carlin Roman III came to the establishment. He had lost his wife to cancer and was single-handedly raising his teenage son, John Carlin Roman IV. Yes, the boy was named after his father. Mechele approached John's table and they met. Their communication lasted a long time, and in August, John confessed that he was going to visit Amsterdam. Mechele exclaimed, "I dream of flying there too." John offered to travel together, and the girl agreed. Whether this trip took place is unknown, but John fell madly in love with Mechele. Upon learning about her 2 fiancés, he said, "I loved her so much that I didn't care." Now, how do you understand that? Do men ever think with their heads and not with other body parts? This story gets more and more confusing and intriguing with each section. A love quadrangle, lies, manipulation, all this cannot end well. But let's not jump ahead and wait for the denouement of this strange case. But before that, my friends, a very important point: the creation of such content requires a lot of time, and now my channel and I are experiencing not the best financial situation. I will be endlessly grateful to you if you become a sponsor of this channel and support me with your donation. and in return, I will be able to personally respond to you in the comments and also mention your noble name in my video. So become sponsors. I will be immensely grateful to you. In November 1995, Mechele started a major renovation of her house. John, without much thought, offered her to move in with him for this period. By the way, Kent and Scott also moved into John's place, although Scott lived there only occasionally when he was in town, as his work involved frequent business trips. Just imagine this situation: Mechele, Kent, Scott, John, and his son all living in one big house under the same roof. It's a real love quadrangle. What an unconventional family, right? I can't even imagine how they distributed responsibilities and built relationships in this format. However, it's worth giving Mechele credit. She managed to find common ground with John's son. Moreover, she practically replaced the boy's mother. She helped, supported, and was always ready to listen. John greatly appreciated this attitude and tried in every way to thank his beloved. For example, he fully paid for the renovation of her house and gave her a luxurious fur coat. And for Christmas 1995, John proposed to Mechele. Thus, now our heroine had 3 fiancés who literally showered her with jewelry, furs, and even paid for her car. Isn't that a fairy tale life? When information about this story reached the public, many compared it to the plot of an American sitcom. No wonder. A woman lives under the same roof with 3 men. They even have a schedule according to which she spends time with each of them in turn. And now this trio is on trial for the murder of one of Mechele's fiancés. Is this even possible in real life? Apparently, yes. This case is a prime example of what tangled love affairs and living large can lead to. Damn it, this is not fiction. This is a real situation. I didn't make anything up. You can even Google it yourself and check. At the end of December 1995, Scott had to urgently leave on business for California. That's when he decided to break off his relationship with Mechele. John and Kent were over the moon with happiness. Here's how John commented on this situation. My relationship with Mechele began to develop rapidly as soon as she broke up with Scott. It would seem that finally harmony reigned in this love quadrangle. Kent even called his parents and told them that he and Mechele were planning to get married, so they should get ready for the wedding. Oh, if only they knew what would happen next. However, on Christmas 1996, the unexpected happened. Mechele and Scott reconciled. The girl began to fly to him in California, and when she returned to Anchorage, she stayed at John's house. Kent was living separately at this time, but periodically visited his lovers. Soon he calls his mother again and says that he and Mechele want to finally set a wedding date. You see, Mom, Kent explained, Mechele wants change. She wants a real family, children. What a twist, and this after all her affairs on the side. And so Mechele and Kent return to their own house and open a joint checking account. Kent even makes a will in which he names Mechele as the main heir. Moreover, he takes out life insurance for her for a whole $1 million. It is worth noting that Mechele herself refused to make Kent the beneficiary of her insurance policy. The man's parents were extremely dissatisfied with this arrangement. They did not understand why such a large insurance sum was needed and tried to cancel the policy, but to no avail, and Kent's brother, Craig, bluntly told him, "Do you realize that this is dangerous for your life? You're in the crosshairs." How prophetic those words turned out to be. You know, friends, this story gets more and more complicated with each section. Relationships in the love quadrangle are changing at the speed of light, and now there's $1 million insurance policy at stake. Something tells me this isn't going to end well. What's going to happen next? April 26, 1996 was supposed to be a special day for Kent and Mechele. They had set it as their wedding date. Kent's father decided to personally meet his future daughter-in-law and discuss the details of the ceremony. He came to his son, hoping for a warm meeting, but found only a confused and saddened Kent. It turned out that Mechele had simply packed her things and left. Kent was completely devastated, so his father decided to stay with him to support him in this difficult time. However, soon he had to return home to Michigan. He didn't even know that 2 hours later, Kent would send him and his mother 2 mysterious letters. Upon receiving the alarming messages, Kent's parents opened the first envelope. The letter said, "If something happens to me, open the second letter. But if the wedding with Mechele takes place, never open it." Frightened by such an ominous appeal, they immediately called their son, but he did not answer. It was decided to set aside the second letter for better times. On May 2, 1996, an ordinary service crew was heading to a remote communications tower near the town of Holb, Alaska. As the truck driver approached the facility, he noticed a red spot on the trail near the tower. Upon closer inspection, the man realized that it was a person in a red jacket lying motionless on the ground. It became almost immediately clear that this unfortunate soul was dead. An hour later, the police arrived at the scene, but there were no suspects at that time. Law enforcement officers thoroughly searched the area for evidence. Almost immediately, they managed to find spent cartridges. Examination showed that they belonged to a Desert Eagle .44 caliber pistol. Also, 2 different sets of footwear tracks were found at the crime scene. One track was left by the deceased man in red, and the other obviously belonged to the killer. A strange and eerie story, isn't it? A planned wedding that never happened, the mysterious escape of the bride, and then the murder of one of the participants in this love quadrangle. Moreover, the evidence found indicates that the killer was waiting for his victim near that tower. The only question is, who could it be? Could it be that someone from this company planned to get rid of Kent in advance? It's still difficult to draw any conclusions so far, but I feel that the investigation of this case will be extremely interesting and confusing. The police wasted no time and quickly identified the deceased. It turned out to be Kent Leppink. He had a driver's license, a checkbook, and an insurance policy on him. The most interesting thing is that just a few days before his tragic death, Kent for some reason changed the beneficiary of his life insurance policy. Now his father and mother were listed in this column. But here's what's strange for some reason. The police papers did not indicate who the previous beneficiary was. And you and I remember that earlier Kent had written Mechele there. A coincidence? I don't think so. The detectives decided to examine the checkbook more closely and found out that Kent had a joint account with Mechele. Having learned her address, they went to her house. On May 5, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the police knocked on the door and began to ask Mechele about the nature of her relationship with Kent. The woman replied that they were unique, so complex and confusing that words cannot describe it. She tried to explain to the investigators their strange love quadrangle, which they did not yet know about. "I already have a boyfriend, and so does Kent, but he and I am not a couple," Mechele stated. "Do you think this clarified anything? I don't think so either." Next, the cops were interested in where Mechele had been all this time. She said that she had only returned from California a couple of days ago, but she had gone with Scott to the lake, and that she hadn't seen Kent for a long time. By the way, Mechele didn't even know about his death. It was the police who informed her of this news. The woman seemed to have been replaced. She began to sob, and when she calmed down a little, she told the officers that Kent was not really her fiancé. They said the engagement was just a cover for his non-traditional orientation. That's the secret. At that time, the police did not yet have any leads or theories about this murder, but soon they will appear, and from an unexpected source. Meanwhile, Kent's parents were informed of their son's death, and without hesitation, they opened the second envelope with his deathbed message, and there was a bombshell. "Mechele, John, or Scott are the closest people to me who could have killed me. Do me a favor, put Mechele behind bars for many years." He named himself a suspect. Of course, the parents immediately informed the police about this letter and also told them about Kent's $1 million insurance policy. And only then did the investigators find out that Mechele, it turns out, was simultaneously engaged to 3 men, Kent, Scott, and John. What a twist. I don't know about you, but I like this story less and less with every minute. There are too many dark spots and understatements in it. And these strange coincidences with the change of the insurance beneficiary and Kent's deathbed letter. It cannot be otherwise. Someone from this foursome is hiding something. We can only hope that the persistent cops will be able to unravel this tangle of intrigues and gain justice for the deceased Kent. Having received such intriguing information, the investigators decided to visit Mechele again. They were interested in whether anyone had a motive for killing Kent, so they began to ask more specific questions about the insurance policy. And then Mechele revealed an interesting detail. It turns out that Kent's life was insured for a whole $1 million. It was she who paid the premiums for this insurance. In her opinion, such a large sum could become a serious motive for the crime. But the police never managed to find out whether Mechele knew about the change of beneficiaries in the policy. Her alibi was ironclad. On April 25, she went to Scott in California and returned only after Kent's murder. But can she be trusted? Meanwhile, the news of the police's suspicions reached Scott. The man was shocked and outraged. To clear himself of the charges, he agreed to take a lie detector test. And what do you think? Scott failed the test miserably. Unfortunately, we don't know what questions they asked him, but the detective in charge of the case noted that polygraph results are not always reliable. And in general, Scott wasn't even in Alaska at the time of the murder. It's only strange that for some reason the police did not bother to check the data on his flights and calls. They didn't follow through, in my opinion. In the end, the cops' attention was drawn to John. They visited him at home, but the man assured them that he knew nothing about the murder. However, Kent's car was parked near his house, and in the glove compartment, the investigators found a very interesting letter. They christened it the Note of Hope. In it, Mechele asked John not to tell anyone that she would be in some kind of house in the city of Hobb, Alaska, and she hinted that she would not be alone there. The main thing is that John should keep his mouth shut and not report this to Kent. Mechele herself claimed that there was no house at all. And to be honest, John really had no property near Hobb. And what do we have? $1 million insurance policy, a failed polygraph test, a mysterious note. It seems that each of this trio is hiding something. But which one of them still dared to commit murder? So far, there is no answer to this question. We can only hope that the persistent cops will be able to unravel this tangle of secrets and lies. And you and I will follow the development of events. Investigators suggested that Mechele deliberately left the note where Kent could see it. In this way, she wanted to lure him to Hobb, and most likely on the day of his murder, that's where he went. In my opinion, this is very similar to a pre-planned crime, but let's not jump to conclusions for now. Next, new information surfaces about that same insurance policy. Why did Mechele and Kent decide to take it out? It turns out that in February of '96, just 3 months before the tragedy, the couple in love met with an insurance agent. They told him that they were planning to take out a loan together to buy a fishing boat, and for this, they supposedly needed a life insurance policy. Moreover, both of them wanted to insure themselves for $1 million. But the agent explained that for such an amount, he could only insure Kent. As for Mechele, who was not going to work on the boat and was not yet an official wife, she could count on a maximum of $150,000. Something tells me that this insurance is the key to solving the murder. And not long before his death, Kent confessed to his lawyers that Mechele had been deceiving him. It turns out that she was stealing his things to make expensive purchases with his credit card. One of the lawyers advised Kent to break off the relationship immediately because Mechele was unlikely to change. They say she would continue to spend his money and dance in that club. A few days later, Kent told another lawyer, "I'm going to be killed." The lawyer urged Kent to stay away from his brides and Mechele, and if the threat was serious, to go to the police. But Kent seemed to have lost his mind because of love. He could not leave Mechele. And what did he do after that conversation? He changed the beneficiary of his life insurance policy. A strange coincidence, isn't it? After the investigation reached a dead end, John Carlin Roman III and his son John Carlin Roman IV went to New Jersey. By the way, John S.R. had already spent almost his entire $1 million in insurance payments, which he received after an injury at work. And the lion's share of this money he spent on Mechele, so he had only pennies left. Meanwhile, Scott broke off all ties with Mechele and returned to his ex-wife. And our mermaid, if you remember, who danced at the club, returned to New Orleans and entered university. Life went on as usual, and one day Mechele met Mechele Linehan, a medical student. She immediately told him about her past, and you know what he replied? "The past is in the past. We live on." Words of gold, in my opinion. Ha ha ha, sorry. In the spring of 1998, Mechele and Colin got married, and the following year they had a baby girl. Later, Colin became a military doctor, and the young family moved to Olympia, Washington. Mechele took care of household chores and earned a master's degree. She was actively involved in raising her daughter and even helped out at a local volunteer center. 10 years passed and no one even mentioned the murder of Kent Leppink. But in 2005, the case was transferred to the newly created Department for the Investigation of Especially Serious Crimes. Detective Jim Stock became the lead investigator in this case. While reviewing the materials, he noticed one interesting fact. It turns out that many years ago, the police had interrogated young John Carlin Roman IV, the son of John Carlin Roman III. But since the boy was a minor at the time, the interrogation was conducted in the presence of his father. And now John Roman IV was already 27 years old, and he practically did not communicate with his father. Detective Stock decided that this was a chance to learn something new. Perhaps the young man would want to talk about those long-ago events. So Jim and his colleague went to Tacoma, Washington. And there, John Carlin Roman IV told them that his father had bought a Desert Eagle 44 pistol shortly after the family moved to Alaska. And the boy also saw how on the day of Kent's murder, his father was washing this weapon with bleach. Then John S.R. told his son that this was the best way to get rid of evidence. The investigators also sent Mechele's laptops and John's desktop computer for examination. This equipment was seized back then, immediately after the murder, but for unknown reasons it was not thoroughly checked. And so in the fall of 2006, the detectives presented all the collected evidence to the Alaska grand jury. And although there was no direct evidence, the prosecutors believed that this was enough to charge Mechele and John with conspiracy and first-degree murder. That's how things are, friends. Even 10 years after the crime, new leads appear. And now everything points to the fact that Mechele and John were indeed involved in Kent's murder. And that constantly changing insurance only heightened suspicion. It remains to hear the verdict of the jury. When John Carlin Roman III learned about the charges against him, he immediately flew from New Jersey to Anchorage. On October 4, 2006, the man appeared at the courthouse, ready to fight for his freedom. Meanwhile, detectives visited Mechele's home to arrest her. The door was opened by Carlin, the suspect's husband, who said that his wife was not at home. The police issued an ultimatum. Carlin had only an hour to bring Mechele to the station, and soon the woman, accompanied by her husband and lawyer, crossed the threshold of the police station, and within a few hours she was already flying to Anchorage to meet her fate. In the spring of 2007, the trial of John Carlin Roman III took place. This high-profile case attracted the attention of the international press. The courtroom was filled with journalists and members of the public. No wonder, because in the dock was a young and attractive doctor's wife, who moreover was simultaneously engaged to 3 men. Everyone was interested in the spicy details of her personal life. How did she manage to live under the same roof with 3 suitors and at the same time make love with each of them in turn? But now she and one of her fiancés were facing severe punishment for the murder of Kent Leppink. The prosecutor built his case on the fact that Mechele allegedly persuaded Kent to take out a $1 million insurance policy and name her as the beneficiary. And then John Carlin, in a prior conspiracy with the insidious beauty, killed his rival. They say the couple in love planned to share the insurance payout and live happily ever after. But their dreams were not destined to come true because before his death, Kent had time to change the beneficiaries to his parents. By the way, the prosecution claimed that Mechele and John borrowed the idea for the murder from the movie The Last Seduction. It also told the story of a treacherous woman who persuades her lover to get rid of her husband for money. The lover ends up behind bars and the beauty runs away with all the money. Something very familiar, isn't it? John Carlin's lawyer tried to convince the jury that her client was only a victim of Mechele's manipulations. They say this sly fox seduced the unfortunate man and then cruelly got rid of Kent in order to appropriate his wealth. And what about Mechele herself? She denied everything and accused young John Carlin Roman IV of the murder. This version was also supported by Scott Hilk, another ex-fiancé of the defendant. However, the most incriminating evidence was provided to the court by none other than John Carlin Roman IV. The young man told how on the day of Kent's murder, he saw his father diligently washing the weapon with bleach. They say Dad even explained to his son then, the best way to get rid of traces is to thoroughly clean the gun with chemicals. True, John Surna's lawyers stated that the boy was a capricious teenager with a difficult character who hated Kent and could have killed him himself. But the nail in the coffin of the defendant was the deleted emails that experts recovered from Mechele's laptop. In them, John wrote to his beloved about scandals and quarrels, threatened Kent, and showed crazy jealousy towards him. Sometimes these letters were somewhat vague and incomprehensible. For example, on March 17, 1996, 2 months before the murder, Carlin wrote to Mechele, "I'll call you as soon as I have them." The prosecution saw this as a hint at insurance documents. On March 31, Mechele herself mysteriously told Scott that she was expecting a cash flow soon, although she did not explain its source. And a week before Kent's death, John assured Mechele, "Everything will be fine, honey. Just wait a little longer and your life will change dramatically for the better. You'll see." The prosecutor emphasized that Mechele was obsessed with the desire for money and did not disdain any methods to obtain it. John, on the other hand, was obsessed with Mechele herself and was ready to carry out any of her orders. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On April 3, 2007, they finally announced their verdict. Guilty. John Carlin Roman III was sentenced to 99 years in prison. True, he was granted the right to parole, but he will be able to use it only after 33 years, at the age of 82. That is, in fact, it is a life sentence. In the fall of the same year, Mechele also appeared before the court. The girl was counting on a more successful outcome, because the main evidence was collected against her former lover, not against her. But witnesses were found who dug deeper. A former colleague of Mechele's from the strip club said that they had watched that infamous movie, The Last Seduction, together. And then Mechele allegedly said that she would not mind being in the place of the main character of the film. Scott Hilk, for his part, suggested that it was the young John Carlin Roman IV who could have shot Kent. They say the boy himself boasted to him on the phone that the murdered man had been shot in the stomach. and this at a time when neither the press nor Mechele nor Carlin SR knew the details of the crime yet. So where could the young man have learned such details? Most likely he himself was present at the scene of the massacre. However, despite all the efforts of the lawyers, on October 22, 2007, Mechele was also found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge aptly remarked that there is no difference between the puppet that pulls the trigger and the puppeteer that pulls the strings. The defendant was sentenced to 99 years in prison. One could end this eerie story here, but fate had its own plans. Shortly after he began serving his sentence, on October 27, 2008, other prisoners brutally dealt with John Carlin Roman III. Such a sad finale for a loser lover. True, after his death, the heirs began a legal battle and still managed to overturn John's sentence, citing indirect evidence of his guilt. Mechele's relatives also filed an appeal. They argued that the judge of first instance made a fatal mistake by admitting inadmissible evidence into the case testimony about the movie and Kent's deathbed letter. After all, the defense had no opportunity to interrogate the deceased and clarify the context of his message. And what does some thriller have to do with it? In the end, the Court of Appeal agreed with this and overturned Mechele's sentence for lack of evidence. What an unexpected twist. Two former lovers suspected of a brazen murder are set free. Who could have predicted this? But despite the tragic nature of this story, it seems that Mechele managed to start life from scratch. Now she lives in Seattle with her loving husband Carlin and daughter, working as a laser technician in a clinic. To her credit, Mechele did not even demand compensation for her wrongful imprisonment. The story of a love quadrangle that led to a horrific murder has finally ended. It intertwined passion and jealousy, greed and cold calculation. And despite the numerous evidence, we still do not know for certain who was behind this crime. Perhaps someday the secrets of the love quadrangle will be fully revealed, but it will happen without our participation. There is a widespread belief in the world that the lives of American schoolchildren revolve around football. This idea is reinforced by countless Hollywood movies, where the most popular and beautiful girl is always a cheerleader, and her boyfriend is invariably the captain of the football team. The people involved in the story we are about to discuss seem to have stepped off the screens of such films, but unfortunately, the happy ending typical of these movies did not happen in reality. And today, we will examine the case of Emma Walker. Central High School in Knoxville, Tennessee. The football stadium is illuminated by bright lights, and the energy of the fans is off the charts. The entire town has gathered to support their beloved football team, the Bobcats. The cheerleaders and the school band do not give the spectators a single second of respite. In the fall of 2014, a new face appeared among the cheerleaders. 14-year-old Emma Walker became the only freshman to make it onto the team that year. Everyone around her described her as a cheerful, energetic girl with a charming smile. Emma took her new activity with great responsibility, and she truly enjoyed the atmosphere of football competitions. However, despite her success in sports, Emma was also an extremely intelligent and diligent student. She dreamed of becoming a nurse in the neonatal unit to care for sick or prematurely born babies. During cheerleading practice, Emma caught the attention of one of the football team players who played the receiver position, William Riley Gall, known simply as Riley among his friends. He noticed Emma on the edge of the football field, and a spark immediately ignited between them. Riley, who was only 2 years older than Emma, had already managed to become the best player on the team and gained considerable popularity among his classmates. He was a member of the local church, loved video games, and according to his friends, had a rather specific sense of humor. At the time he met Emma, Riley was already in a romantic relationship with another girl. But soon after, he ended that relationship to start dating Emma, the most talented player on the school football team and a charming young cheerleader. In American high schools, such couples are simply destined to become popular among their peers. Riley quickly found common ground with Emma's family, and as her parents recounted, he made the impression of a pleasant, well-mannered, and polite young man. But after some time, their opinion of him changed when they learned that Riley had kept his promise to his ex-girlfriend and went with her to the junior prom. As for the senior prom, he went with Emma. Emma's parents considered such behavior frivolous and were displeased that, in their opinion, their daughter was not a priority for Riley. But Emma herself didn't seem too bothered by it. Her social media pages were filled with photos of her and Riley together, showing the couple having fun and spending time with each other. Emma's friends didn't know Riley well as a person. At first, they justified this by his shy and reserved nature. But over time, It became apparent that this was not the case, and they began to consider the guy somewhat strange. Many of them noted that Riley's behavior gradually revealed his desire to isolate Emma from communicating with anyone but himself. He showed himself as a jealous owner who seeks to control the girl's every move. Emma's friends, concerned about the situation, shared their fears with her. They warned that such relationships rarely lead to anything good and advised her to reconsider whether she really needed it. However, Emma dismissed their concerns, assuring them that it was just an outward impression and that there was nothing to worry about. Emma's parents, in an attempt to put an end to their daughter's toxic relationship, took away her phone to prevent contact with her boyfriend. But Riley found a way out. He bought Emma an iPod Touch so they could secretly text each other. Over the course of 2 years, the couple broke up and got back together many times. But with each breakup, their relationship became increasingly poisonous. The breakups became more serious and dramatic, and the fights more frequent. Riley constantly called Emma and bombarded her with messages one after another. When the girl got a job, he could wait for her at the entrance for hours to continue the conflict face to face. Once, in a fit of emotion, he even shouted, You're dead to me. I'll write your obituary." But every time an offensive message was inevitably followed by an apology. "I'm sorry for my behavior. You're the most precious thing in the world to me." As Mark and Jill, Emma's parents, recount, they repeatedly tried to persuade their daughter to end the relationship. "He found a way to distance her from us and convince her that he was her only one," Jill shares. The more they tried to prevent Emma from seeing Riley, the more actively their daughter defended him. By the fall of 2016, the situation remained unchanged. Riley had enrolled in Maryville College, located a half-hour drive from home, while 16-year-old Emma continued to attend high school. "I wish she would come back to Knoxville. I miss the days when we could see each other every day," she wrote to him. At the end of October 2016, Emma's parents, in a desperate attempt to help their daughter, forbade her from going anywhere except school and cheerleading practice. They began closely monitoring where she went, whom she met with, and what she did. And amazingly, it yielded the desired results. As Emma's father, Mark, notes, she began spending more time with her family and friends again, and her cheerfulness returned. Moreover, in correspondence with her friend Keegan, she reported that she and Riley had broken up peacefully after she saw photos of him hugging girls from his college. Emma's friends breathed a sigh of relief, as they had feared that Riley would not let her go so easily. On Friday, November 18th, 2016, with her parents' permission, Emma went to a party at her close friend's house. Around 11:30 p.m., her friend Zach also arrived there. Emma quickly pulled him inside and told him that she was receiving mysterious text messages from an unknown number. One of the messages said, "Come outside alone if you don't want someone close to you to get hurt. Take your keys and go to your car. Otherwise, it won't end well for him." Emma assumed it might be a prank by one of Riley's friends. In response, she wrote that she would go to the police, but the threat had no effect, and the messages became even more alarming. One of them said that Riley's body had been dumped in front of the house. Emma and Zach went outside and saw that someone was indeed lying face down in a ditch nearby. It turned out to be Riley. When they approached him, he was holding his head and seemed disoriented. The guy said that he had been kidnapped and had no idea how he ended up there. Emma burst into tears and said through her sobs that they had broken up and asked him to leave her alone. Then Riley, extremely depressed, got up and walked down the street alone. On the way, he called his friend Noah, telling him about the kidnapping. But Noah didn't believe a word he said. Emma spent a restless night with her friends, and after 10 a.m., she headed home with her friend Haley, who lived nearby. As the girls were approaching the house, they noticed a suspicious young man dressed all in black walking down the street not far from Emma's place of residence. After dropping off Haley, Emma returned home alone. She went inside intending to change clothes before meeting her mom, but the mysterious stranger returned and started knocking and ringing the doorbell. The frightened girl sent messages to her friends and also to the person who, in her opinion, was always ready to come to her aid, Riley. In the message, she wrote, "I hate you, but I need you right now." He replied that he was rushing to her, and when he finally arrived, the mysterious stranger was gone. However, Emma's friend Haley claimed that she recognized Riley himself as the guy in black. According to her, she saw his car parked nearby and even sent him a message asking what he was doing near Emma's house, to which Riley replied with a denial. Jill Walker, Emma's mother, having received an alarming message from her daughter about the suspicious stranger, came home and found Emma talking to Riley in the yard. The woman reminded the couple about the undesirability of his presence near her daughter and asked him to leave. Emma was trembling with fear, worried that it could have been a robber trying to break into the house. Jill, on the contrary, doubted the coincidence of the situation, but Emma continued to insist on Riley's non-involvement in the incident. After this incident, Jill and Mark Walker, extremely concerned about their daughter's safety, decided to drive the girl to work themselves in the morning, spend the day with her there, and return home together in the evening. The evening of Sunday, November 20th, 2016, at the Walker family home was quiet and peaceful. Emma was chatting with her friend Keegan and went to bed around midnight. Shortly after midnight, Riley, who had returned to Maryville, asked his roommate to borrow his phone. From this phone, he called Emma, and as Riley himself later claimed, during the conversation, Emma told him about her unwillingness to be together. According to him, after that, their conversation was suddenly cut off. Then Riley bombarded Emma with numerous text messages and made about 40 calls, leaving a myriad of voice messages on the answering machine. However, Emma did not respond, and eventually, Riley stopped trying to contact her. In the middle of the night, Mark, Emma's father, woke up to the sound of footsteps in the house and 2 slams of doors. He got up, walked around the house, looked into the bedrooms of Emma and her brother, but noticed nothing suspicious. Assuming that he had imagined it, Mark returned to bed. Around 6 in the morning, Jill went to Emma's room to wake her up for school. She called the girl by name, but she did not answer. Approaching the bed, the woman touched her daughter's leg, but Emma remained motionless. Looking at the girl's face, Jill immediately realized the need to call an ambulance immediately. Emma was pale and her lips had turned a bluish tint. Jill tried to feel for a pulse, but to no avail.
What's going on there?
I just tried to wake up my daughter for school, and she has no pulse.
Stay on the line. I'm transferring you to Rural Metro.
Rural Metro, can you tell me what's going on? She's non-responsive. She's gone. Okay, is she breathing? No. Her tongue's hanging out of her mouth. Is she laying on her back? Yes.
16-year-old Emma Walker was dead. Soon, the police arrived at the Walker house. Near Emma's mouth, a small amount of blood was found, and everything indicated that she had vomited after swallowing something. However,
the police officer's attention was drawn to a barely noticeable but extremely suspicious hole in the wall of Emma's bedroom. It was a bullet hole. While the girl was sleeping, someone had shot her in the head through the wall. 2 shell casings were found outside the house, and law enforcement needed to determine where the second shot had hit. After examining the perimeter of the house, the police eventually discovered another bullet hole at approximately the same height as the first one. This shot was also fired in the direction of Emma's bedroom, and its exit hole was located directly next to her bed. Both holes were located about 1.5 meters from the bedroom window, and the shots were fired between 230 and 300 a.m. One bullet hit the girl behind her left ear and probably instantly took her life. The second bullet got stuck in Emma's pillow. Whoever committed this crime knew exactly the location of the room and the position in which the girl would be lying. Social media exploded with sympathetic messages about Emma's tragic death. Among them were tweets from Riley Gall. "I love you, Emma. I can't be there yet. It's too soon. I know that. You know how much I want to be there. But I understand that I can't. I love you. My beautiful Emma." 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 8. Be sure to remind God about it. I love you. Forever and always. Every day without Emma Walker. I love you, beautiful. And I know that you are in a better place now. During one of the matches of the local football team, the cheerleaders released pink balloons into the sky in memory of their prematurely deceased friend. When the police began questioning Emma Walker's family and friends, one name invariably came up again and again: Riley Gall. Some of Riley's friends, concerned about his condition after Emma's passing, told detectives about a secret he had shared with them the day after his alleged kidnapping. According to them, Riley said that he now feared for his own life, so he was carrying his grandfather's pistol with him. He even showed this weapon to his friend Alex. Another friend of Riley's, Noah, told investigators that Riley had inquired about how to get rid of fingerprints on a gun. However, Riley noted that he was asking not for himself, but for his roommate. It is noteworthy that just one day before Emma's death, Riley's grandfather reported the disappearance of this very pistol to the police. Riley also asked his friends Noah and Alex to help him get rid of the weapon by throwing it into the Tennessee River. But according to him, it was not at all because it had anything to do with Emma's death. He allegedly wanted to get rid of the pistol because he was afraid that it might get him into trouble and the police would try to link him to the case. On the day of the tragedy, the police talked to Riley for several hours, and the more he spoke, the more gaps appeared in his version of events.
I heard a stray bullet came to the wall, but that made no sense to me because it's her room. If a stray bullet hit the wall, it would have to be from the backyard because that's where her window is. No, I don't know. That one didn't make sense to me, but those are the main three.
Despite his assurances that he was in Maryville at the time of the crime, an analysis of his phone revealed that this was not true. According to satellite data, at midnight, his phone was on the highway on the way from Maryville to Knoxville. Moreover, around 3:45 a.m., his phone was detected near Emma's house, while, according to the forensic examination, the girl died between 2:30 and 3:00 a.m. The officers also questioned Riley about the gun and all the information obtained from Noah and Alex, but he denied ever discussing anything like that with them. The detective asked him, "Did you ever talk to Noah about removing fingerprints from a gun?" Riley replied, "No." At this stage, Riley remained the only suspect, but there was still insufficient evidence for an arrest. As soon as he left the police station, he sent a message to Noah and Alex, asking them not to communicate with the police anymore and ordering them to delete all messages from him. Riley had no idea that his friends would ignore his request and continue to cooperate with law enforcement, as they had been doing from the first minutes after learning about Emma's death. They wanted to assist the investigation and knew they could help find the murder weapon. At first, the police hesitated, warning about possible risks to their safety. But Alex and Noah resolutely stated that it did not scare them, and they were determined to help solve this case. "I wasn't afraid for myself. I was afraid that if we didn't do this, no one would answer for Emma's death," said Alex McCarthy. In close cooperation with the police, Noah and Alex devised a plan to expose Riley's lies. They agreed with him to supposedly help throw his grandfather's pistol into the river. According to the plan, the police were to wait nearby and arrest Riley as soon as he took out the weapon. Alex and Noah, in turn, were supposed to send the officers a code word that would serve as a signal for action. The guys were equipped with microphones and hidden cameras, and the operation finally started.
They interrogated me for 2.5 hours. If they could, they would have arrested me already.
After filming this video, all three of them went to the river, picking up the gun that Riley had been hiding in his stepfather's house the whole time. When they finally arrived at the location, Riley pulled out the gun, intending to get rid of it, but thanks to Noah and Alex, the police were already on standby. 48 hours after the discovery of Emma's lifeless body, the perpetrator was arrested. Riley Gall was charged with the murder of Emma Walker. In the trunk of his car, the police found black clothing and shoes. It became evident that a few days earlier, it was Riley who was the mysterious stranger in black who had been pounding on the door of the Walker family's house. The trial of Riley Gall began only a year and a half later, and he pleaded not guilty. He chose not to testify, and his lawyers did not call any witnesses. The defense was not built on an attempt to deny the fact of the shots. Their main goal was to prove that the bullets that took Emma's life hit her accidentally. They insisted that by shooting at the walls, Riley was simply trying to scare Emma. He supposedly could not have imagined that the bullets would go through the walls. Thus, he allegedly wanted her to get scared and turn to him for help, and then he would have a chance to restore their relationship. His lawyer stated that Riley wanted Emma to see him as a hero who would rush to save her. But everything went wrong when the bullets hit the young girl sleeping peacefully in her bedroom, taking her life. Further, the defense appealed to the jury, stating that even if they found him guilty, it could only be manslaughter, which, by the way, carries a much shorter prison sentence compared to intentional murder. Lawyer's statement, Everything they say about intent towards Emma Walker is fully consistent with an attempt to scare her, because by scaring her, he hoped that she would contact him, and he would try to rekindle the relationship. I'm not saying it's logical. Don't think I'm claiming that there's any logic to it, because there isn't. But it fits the facts known to us from the witnesses. It fits the facts stated by the prosecutor. And we know that such behavior was typical of Emma, as she had recently already asked Riley to save her. However, the prosecutor insisted that it was intentional murder motivated by anger.
I knew how to fire a gun. I thought that he pled guilty in the beginning of this case to shooting a firearm into an occupied dwelling. I thought he did that. And so the relevance of whether or not he knew how to shoot a gun was gone. It doesn't matter. He knows how to shoot a gun. He admits to it. And so yet you spend time in a closing argument to say why he's only learned from PlayStation and from Call of Duty and wall banging that you can shoot through walls with a gun. No waste of your time. He knew how to shoot a gun. He pled guilty to shooting a gun.
Will you please stand? Mr. Gilder, in count one, the first defined offense charging the defendant with first-degree murder, did the jury reach a verdict?
Yes, we did.
What is your verdict?
Guilty.
And for the lesser included offense of stalking, did the jury reach a verdict?
We did.
What is your verdict?
Guilty.
The jury found William Riley Gall guilty of first-degree murder, as well as stalking, theft, and illegal possession of a firearm. In the state of Tennessee, a conviction for first-degree murder automatically carries a life sentence. Riley Gall was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole no earlier than after 51 years. By that time, he will be over 70 years old. In May 2021, it became known that Riley Gall was trying to seek an acquittal, citing insufficient evidence. However, his petition was denied. Emma was supposed to graduate from high school in 2018, but instead, her family received her diploma. Her graduation cap and gown lay on the chair that would have been her seat. At the school where she studied, a scholarship was established in her honor. Jill Walker, Emma's mother, said that her daughter's love for animals and desire to become a nurse for newborns eloquently testify to the kind of person she was. Since then, the Walker family has opened a dog shelter and a neonatal rehabilitation unit at the Children's Hospital of East Tennessee, which also bear Emma Walker's name. According to Jill Walker, everything they do is aimed at ensuring that people remember Emma and never forget that they should always be a little kinder. This country, with a population of over 200 million people, has always impressed with its contrasts and diversity. But now we will focus on the metropolis of Sao Paulo, the economic heart of the state. Among the numerous wealthy families of this city, the von Richthofen family stood out. Their estate, located in the prestigious Brooklyn district, was valued at around some 3 million Brazilian dollars. Imagine this: luxurious living rooms, cozy bedrooms, a huge swimming pool, a spacious office, and even a private library. All of this was hidden behind a high brick wall surrounded by exotic plants. The entrance to the mansion was guarded by massive gates, as if emphasizing the status and privacy of the owners' lives. You know, when my colleagues told me about this family, I immediately understood that behind the external glamour and luxury, there could be something more. After all, as the saying goes, the wealthier the family, the more reasons for envy and ill intentions from others. And unfortunately, as subsequent events showed, this assumption turned out to be true. The house itself was surrounded by a high fence that securely protected the residents from prying eyes. However, the staff and guests had to pass through massive gates, which likely symbolized the strength and steadfastness of this family in the eyes of society. At least, that's how it might have seemed at first glance. Allow me to introduce you to the head of the von Richthofen family, Montfort, a brilliant German engineer. This man held the position of director in a large company responsible for the operation of highways and roads leading to Sao Paulo. His wife, Mauricia, was a native Brazilian and worked as a local psychiatrist. The story of their meeting is quite romantic. Montfort was studying civil engineering at the University of Sao Paulo at the time, and it was there that his eyes first met Mauricia's. As they themselves told, it was love at first sight. The friendly and sociable Mauricia perfectly complemented the calm and gentle Montfort. It seemed like fate had brought them together. Later, they got married and started dreaming of children, And so in 1983, their firstborn daughter, named Susan, was born. 4 years later, her younger brother Andres was born. Both children grew up in a wealthy family and attended the most prestigious private schools in Sao Paulo. Describing Susan, she was a rather quiet and shy girl. Although she was not a leader among her peers, she had a few close friends. Susan was always an obedient daughter and had a warm relationship with her brother. Additionally, the girl showed remarkable abilities in languages and later mastered 3 foreign languages. After graduating from a German high school, she decided to continue her studies at the law faculty of the University of Sao Paulo. In my opinion, if Susan had succeeded in the legal field, perhaps her life would have turned out differently. Despite her aspirations for a successful career, the girl never had a need for money. And there was a simple reason for this: her parents were extremely wealthy people. According to my information, the wealth of the von Richthofen family was estimated at approximately $17 million. And according to unverified information, Manfred had around 10 million euros in a Swiss bank account, which he planned to pass on to Susan after her studies. So essentially, the girl only had to be an obedient daughter and wait for her inheritance. However, as the year 2002 approached, cracks began to appear in the relationship between the parents and Susan. The girl had just reached adulthood and, as often happens, was more interested in love than finances. I will now share all the details with you. It seemed like the girl had everything: a carefree childhood, brilliant education, and a guaranteed $1 million inheritance. But did this bring her happiness? As subsequent events showed, probably not. By the year 2002, the relationship between Susan and her parents began to deteriorate. The thing was, Susan turned 18, and like most of her peers, she became more interested in love than finances. But let's go back a bit to 1999. At that time, the von Richthofen family visited an airplane model exhibition. Susan's younger brother Andreas showed a keen interest in this hobby. It was there that he met 19-year-old Daniel Kravinhos, who already had experience in creating flying models. Intrigued, Andreas even asked his parents to pay for modeling lessons with Daniel, and they agreed, not suspecting the consequences it would lead to. While the boys enthusiastically engaged in building airplanes, Daniel unexpectedly caught the attention of Andreas' older sister, Susan. At first glance, Daniel and Susan seemed like complete opposites. He, a boy from a poor and troubled family, who was even expelled from college for poor performance. She, a well-bred girl from an aristocratic family who had received a brilliant education. However, despite all the differences, a real passion flared up between them. Susan was intrigued by Daniel's rebellious nature. He was to her the embodiment of freedom and new exciting emotions. And although the girl understood that her parents would likely not approve of such a choice, she could not resist his charms. So Susan began to secretly meet with Daniel. She did not yet know the tragic consequences this decision would lead to. For a while, this cunning plan worked. The parents were not thrilled about Daniel's visits, but still allowed him to come, considering him Andreas' regular friend. However, as it is known, lies eventually come to light. And one day, Manfred and Mauritia finally learned the truth about Daniel, that he was not studying anywhere, regularly used prohibited substances, and abused alcohol. Of course, such a discovery could not please them. As an experienced detective, I understand well the parents' desire to protect their child. Manfred and Mauritia spared no effort to ensure a better future for Susan, and now all their efforts could go to waste because of some garage mechanic. But the lovers were not ready to give up. Unexpectedly, Susan's younger brother Andreas stood by their side. The boy adored his sister sincerely and considered Daniel his best friend, so he decided to help the two of them by hiding their secret meetings from their parents. While Susan and Daniel enjoyed their forbidden encounters, Andreas came up with plausible stories for the parents, covering for his sister. But how long would he be able to lead everyone by the nose? And what consequences would this deceit lead to? While Susan and Daniel's romance was gaining momentum, Susan's younger brother Andreas became their true guardian angel. He sincerely admired Daniel's rebellious spirit and adored his sister, so he actively facilitated their meetings. While the lovers were hanging out at the auto shop or spending time at Daniel's home, Andreas skillfully covered for them in front of their parents. The boy came up with ingenious excuses to justify Susan's long absences and divert parental suspicions. But fate gave the couple a chance to be together for a whole month. Manfred and Mauritia set off on a long vacation to Europe, leaving the children in charge of the estate. Susan, who had already turned 18 at that time, saw this as a great opportunity to prove her maturity and independence to her parents. However, Susan decided differently. Instead of taking responsibility for the house, she secretly invited Daniel to stay at the mansion. And so the lovers spent a whole month enjoying life by the pool, generously pouring alcohol into their glasses and indulging in ecstasy like seeds. From a detective's perspective, I can assume that these two clearly decided to make up for lost time. After all, they had been forced to hide in corners and strangers' garages until now. And here they were, a luxurious empty house at their disposal. But as it is known, everything in life comes at a price. Upon their return from vacation, the parents learned how Susan had spent her time in their absence. And thus, real battles began in the von Richthofen family. The scandals and arguments did not cease for weeks. The parents tried to reason with their daughter, but she demonstratively ignored all their advice. Furthermore, Susan became even more stubborn in her intention to be with Daniel. As the culmination of this confrontation, the girl presented her parents with a bold ultimatum. She demanded that Montfort buy her and her lover an apartment where they could live peacefully and happily. Of course, the family patriarch categorically refused. Montfort stated that Susan could do whatever she pleased, but at her own expense. And for added emphasis, he threatened to cut off the defiant daughter from financial support. This decision infuriated the girl to the point of fainting. She ranted and stomped her feet uncontrollably, but eventually had to give in. At least she pretended to, because in reality, Susan had no intention of giving up. She continued to secretly meet with Daniel. Moreover, the two of them began to hatch some sinister plan. A plan that later shocked all of Brazil and even made seasoned police officers shudder. Attention, I ask you to prepare yourself seriously, as what I am about to tell you is capable of shocking even the most resilient. So on November 1, 22, something horrifying happened at the von Richthofen family estate. Early in the morning, residents of the prestigious Brooklyn district woke up to desperate screams coming from the house. Some frantic screams of horror that sent chills down their spines. As later revealed, it was the children, Susan and Andreas, screaming in despair when they saw a gruesome scene in their parents' bedroom. The previous evening, both teenagers had slipped out of the house for their own errands, and when they returned around 4 in the morning, they had no idea of the horror awaiting them inside. Upon entering the mansion, they ran upstairs to the main bedroom, hoping to greet their parents. But instead of Montfort and Morish's smiling faces, they were met with a gruesome sight. The bloody bodies of the couple lay on the bed in unnatural poses. It was clear at first glance they had been brutally murdered in their sleep. This was evidenced by the rumpled bed and scattered belongings. Judging from the chaos in the room, the unfortunate couple had woken up but had not even had a chance to resist. It seemed like the attackers burst in and immediately began to torment them. When the police officers arrived at the crime scene, they were faced with a horrifying sight. Montfort and Morisha were beaten beyond recognition. Their faces turned into complete bloody masks, their bodies covered in numerous wounds, and prominent red marks of strangulation were visible on the victims' necks. What was particularly striking was that Morisha's head was covered with a plastic garbage bag. Even hardened police officers had to shake themselves to start examining the bodies. Although it initially seemed like burglars had broken into the house, something didn't add up in this version. Yes, the criminals took cash from a suitcase and other hidden places. But was it necessary to be so cruel to the victims for the sake of money? Moreover, expensive items and electronics remained undamaged. Upon inspecting the office and living rooms, the cops came across a series of highly suspicious details. The first thing that caught their eye was the deactivated alarm system. Although the security guards were nearby, they were somehow not notified of the intrusion. Upon closer examination, it became clear. Someone entered the code and deliberately turned off the security system. Furthermore, the ransacked scene seemed somewhat peculiar. Documents and papers, although scattered around the office, were surprisingly evenly distributed. Not at all as it should be after a chaotic search by burglars. Everything indicated an attempt to stage a robbery. Another alarming detail, the doors and windows were left undamaged, meaning the criminals either had keys or someone let them in from the inside. And some rooms were completely bypassed by the criminals as if they knew there was nothing valuable there. While the police tried to unravel this tangle of mysterious circumstances, the public began to build the most incredible assumptions. The media, of course, immediately leaned towards the most obvious suspects, the children of the murdered couple, Susan and Andreas. Reporters portrayed Andreas as a grief-stricken son barely holding it together, on the verge of losing his mind from the loss of his parents. The boy was so deeply affected by the tragedy that he would start gasping for breath from tears during interviews with journalists. In contrast, Susan's behavior raised many questions in society. Unlike her brother, the girl remained remarkably restrained and aloof. There were no signs of despair or suffering, as if she was talking about distant relatives, not her own parents. Of course, everyone grieves in their own way, but Susan's excessive calmness raised certain suspicions. During witness interviews, investigators learned interesting details about how the siblings spent the evening before the murder. It turns out that on October 31 at 9 p.m., Susan took 15-year-old Andreas out of the house, supposedly to a party at an internet cafe. And all this without the knowledge of the parents, who thought their son had long been asleep in bed. Instead of staying with her brother, Susan dropped him off at the entertainment venue and went off in an unknown direction herself. As later revealed, the girl booked a hotel room nearby to be alone. Why did she do this? Perhaps to secure an alibi for herself. These questions kept law enforcement officers on edge. But the most alarming detail was yet to come. Before checking into the hotel, Susan called her boyfriend Daniel. She informed him that they could meet and hang out together. This raised reasonable suspicions with the lovers planning to have a party, but the strangeness did not end there. Around 4 a.m, Susan and Andreas secretly returned home and found their parents dead. So the children went for a walk, and when they returned, Montfort and Mauricia had already been killed. Wasn't this too much of a coincidence? Moreover, the conflicting testimonies of Susan and Andreas added more confusion to the case. While the boy claimed that the parents were strongly against his sister's relationship with Daniel, Susan insisted that Montfort and Mauricia had no issues with her choice of partner. And this, as we remember, was a blatant lie. So the first warning bells rang at this stage of the investigation. Susan's strange behavior, both before and after the murder, cast suspicion on her and her boyfriend. However, the evidence gathered was insufficient to formally accuse them. On November 1, 2002, the von Richthofen couple was laid to rest. Relatives, colleagues of the deceased, and numerous media representatives gathered for the farewell ceremony. Journalists were intrigued by a peculiar detail. While Andreas cried uncontrollably, Susan hardly shed a tear for her parents. Such indifference seemed suspicious even to the average person. Soon, shocking rumors began to spread throughout the town. It was rumored that just 3 days after her parents' death, heartless Susan threw a loud poolside party at her estate. Allegedly, a crowd of young people gathered there, music blared throughout the neighborhood, and the hostess laughed carelessly, as if there was no sorrow. Of course, investigators could not rely solely on gossip. However, information about Susan's strange behavior came from several independent sources. But what troubled detectives the most was an anonymous tip. A mysterious informant told the police about a suspicious purchase made by Daniel's brother Christian Krevinhos. The purchase of a Suzuki motorcycle itself did not seem unusual. However, Christian bought this vehicle at a local dealership just a few days after Montfort and Mauricia's murder. At that time, Christian was 26 years old. He paid for the motorcycle in cash with large bills, which automatically raised suspicion. Those who knew the Krevinhos brothers closely unanimously claimed that neither Daniel nor Christian had a steady job or stable income. These guys were regulars at local bars and constantly used prohibited substances. So where did Christian suddenly get such a sum of money? This tip became a kind of final straw for law enforcement. Gathering all available information, the cops began to lean towards the idea that the solution should be sought among the victim's closest circle among family and acquaintances. And above all, they were interested in Susan and Daniel, whose behavior raised the most questions. Of course, all these coincidences and strange facts could not yet be considered direct evidence. Something more substantial was needed to bring formal charges. So the police decided to focus all their efforts on digging into the young couple and their friends. And very soon, this approach yielded unexpected results. It was the information about the suspicious motorcycle purchase that became the key to unraveling this tangled case. Armed with this lead, the cops immediately summoned Christian Krevinhos, Daniel's brother, for questioning. This young man behaved extremely boldly. He pretended to be a tough guy who knew nothing about the murder. But when the investigators pressed him hard and presented the evidence, Christian finally cracked. What he revealed shocked even seasoned detectives. It turned out that the brutal murder of the von Richthofen couple was orchestrated by none other than Daniel and Susan. According to Christian, this couple planned the murder of the girl's parents, and all this was to finally live together and not depend on anyone. And perhaps the main motive was the $17 million that Susan was supposed to inherit after Montfort and Mauricia's death. Armed with this information, my colleagues immediately arrested the lovers and began interrogating them. And here is where the most interesting part began. Even with fresh handcuff marks on their wrists, Susan and Daniel managed to accuse each other. The girl insisted that money was not the main motive for her. She claimed that she agreed to the murder under pressure from Daniel. But the boy immediately denied this version. According to him, the prospect of getting rich played a decisive role in Susan agreeing to the crime. And most strangely, as soon as they found themselves behind bars, these two suddenly broke off their relationship. It was as if there were no intense feelings or shared dreams of a carefree life. Did the millions cloud their judgment and kill all humanity in them? But let's return to the court case. Despite undeniable evidence of guilt, an exception was made for Susan. She was released on bail until the trial, which began almost 4 years after the crime. And during this time, she clearly did not mourn her parents. Using the services of top lawyers, Susan almost took control of the entire inheritance. At the same time, she gave interviews to local media, where she cried in her vest and accused Daniel of all sins. She claimed that he ruined her family and life. On screen, Susan appeared as a distraught and broken girl, a true victim of circumstances. But in my opinion, all this theatrics was just an attempt to whitewash her reputation. And honestly, she didn't succeed very well. Her tears sounded too fake, and her suffering seemed too staged. So when on July 17, 2006, the courtroom was filled, all the cards were laid out. The jury was presented with a detailed chronology of events on that fateful Halloween night, and what they heard took even the most resilient by surprise. It turns out that while Mauricia and Montford were peacefully asleep, unaware of the impending danger, Susan cunningly led her younger brother out of the house. Andreas was convinced that his sister just wanted to take him to a party at an internet cafe. The poor boy had no idea of the true purpose behind Susan's outing. After dropping her brother off at the party venue, Susan returned home in a car with her accomplices Daniel and Christian. Although the security guard noticed her return, he had no idea that something terrible was about to happen. First, Susan visited her parents' bedroom supposedly to check if Mauricia and Montford was sound asleep. Once she confirmed all was quiet, she deactivated the alarm system, allowing the nighttime guest to enter. Then the criminal trio calmly positioned themselves in the living room. They put on gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, pulled their hoods over their heads, and armed themselves with iron bars. Meanwhile, Susan settled on the couch in front of the TV. Of course, how could she miss her favorite show, even during the murder of her parents? And then Daniel and Christian burst into the couple's bedroom and began assaulting them with the bars. Montford and Mauricia fought desperately for their lives, but the resistance proved futile against the two young, strong men. Seeking to end the bloody ordeal quickly, the brothers grabbed knives and finished off the unfortunate victims. While Montford died immediately, Mauricia turned out to be more resilient. She was still breathing, though it seemed like life was barely flickering in her battered body. Then Daniel committed an unprecedented act of cruelty. He placed a plastic bag over Mauricia's head and tightened it with all his might, cutting off her air supply. Within minutes, the woman suffocated. After completing their dark deed, the three killers proceeded to stage a robbery to cover their tracks. They pocketed the money, scattered documents in the office, and left. Each went their separate ways to create alibis. Christian went to grab a bite at the nearest fast food joint. Daniel and Susan pretended to be a couple in a hotel room and even requested a receipt as proof of their presence. But Susan's behavior was the most cynical. Acting as if nothing had happened, she picked up her brother from the party, brought him home, and started wailing over the bodies of her slain parents. What an acting talent! During the trial, each tried to portray themselves as victims. Susan blamed Daniel, mentioning some mysterious substances he allegedly constantly gave her to manipulate her. On the other hand, the Cravinhos brothers claimed they acted under the influence of the girl. They argued that she orchestrated everything, and they were just protecting their unfortunate friend from abusive alcoholic parents. However, the forensic examination quickly dispelled these myths. There was no trace of alcohol in the victim's blood. Gradually, a coherent picture began to form in the minds of the jurors, and it was grim news for the defendants. Prosecutor Roberta Treadley portrayed Susan as the mastermind, the ideological inspiration behind the crime. In her speeches, the girl was depicted as a cunning enchantress driven by a thirst for money and power. According to the prosecution, Susan was ready to go as far as stepping over her parents' bodies to finally achieve the freedom and wealth she desired. So on July 22, 2006, after 5 days of legal battles, the trio of killers was found guilty. Prosecutors pushed for a 50-year prison term, but unfortunately, such a severe punishment was not handed down to the criminals. Susan and Daniel were sentenced to 40 years behind bars, while Christian received a lighter sentence of 38 years as an accomplice. However, Susan has tried multiple times to appeal the court's decision. She claimed that mental disorders pushed her to commit the crime, or that she was not in her right mind. Of course, all these excuses were dismissed. But her charisma did work its magic. Currently, Susan and Daniel are serving their sentences in a semi-open regime. This means they can go home for holidays and even take vacations, something usually not allowed for murderers. While Susan serves her conditional sentence, the von Rechthofen family home was long sold to unknown buyers. Andreas was left without a roof over his head, without close relatives. And while his sister enjoys her semi-early release, he wanders the world like a ghost. And the worst part is that after Susan's release, she will calmly inherit her parents' fortune. The same $17 million for which she committed murder. While her brother suffers in a shelter, the sister will once again lead a luxurious life. By the time her 40-year sentence ends in 2042, Susan will walk free, rich, and unrestricted, and time will erase all traces of past crimes.